الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. So inshallah ta'ala, in this course we're going to be covering a really important discussion from the discussions that pertain to ዑلوم al-Ḥadīth, and that is one of the most essential components of علم al-Ḥadīth, which is al-Jarḥ wa-al-Taʿdīl. As you've all come across before many times, that the conditions of the muhaddithun rely on two main components in order for the narration to be considered authentic. Number one is ittiṣāl, which is that the chain has to be intact. And number two is the state of each narrator, that the narrator has to be trustworthy. When these two things are found, then overall the hadith is considered authentic. Yes, it can lose that authenticity based on cross-comparing with other narrations and so on and so forth through ilal or through shudud. However, overall the hadith would be considered primarily, or we would in the beginning start off by considering it to be authentic if these two conditions are found. And in the books of Mustalah, you extensively study regarding the concept of ittiṣāl. And the books of Mustalah also discuss the concepts of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, the discussion regarding Jarḥ and Taʿdīl. However, the discussion regarding Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, and really for the student to be very strong or develop a strong ability in the process of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, by relying only on what is mentioned in the books of Mustalah, whether that be Tadrīb al-Rāwi, or whether that be Fath al-Mughīth, or whether it be other books of Mustalah, that is difficult. And the reason for that is because the books of Mustalah are not as well organized, and likewise they're not as well presented when it comes to this specific topic, Jarḥ and Taʿdīl. Yes, they do generally mention these qawā'id, they do generally mention the process, they mention the general outlook, but they're not as preserved or as well organized when it comes to this topic. That's why this is one of the topics which, when I was studying in al-Jami'a al-Islamiyya, in the curriculum they separated the topic altogether, and they had an entire semester just regarding this concept. And the book that was taught was not using Tadrīb al-Rāwi, although this mabhath or the discussions of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl technically do come in Tadrīb al-Rāwi, but they chose not to teach from Tadrīb al-Rāwi or from Fath al-Mughīth. They chose to prepare from A to Z an entire discussion or a book that could extensively cover these topics properly. And there was this work that was compiled by Dr. Abdul Aziz Abdul Latif. He was a teacher in Jami'a Islamiyya for a number of years, and he used to teach this topic again and again and again and again. And because of that, he taught this topic again and again. And initially in the beginning, it might have just been, for example, him gathering some notes from different books, putting them together, then revising it again, then revising it for a third time, then a fourth time, then a fifth time. Eventually, he developed a very strong understanding of this ilm, and he put it together in a book form, and now they just literally teach his book. So it started off like a small little mudhakkira, a small different topics that he gathered, then eventually he teaches year in, year out, and revising and adding and so on and so forth, until eventually it ended up becoming an actual book. And he published the book, and that book was being taught in Jami'a Islamiyya, and that's the book that we studied. And this is a book that we're going to go through inshallah ta'ala as well. So the benefit of this is, it's been compiled by a teacher that has been teaching this topic for not one year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but rather a number of years. And he's putting every single thing into his final book, so that the students can just rely on this as opposed to going to the books of Mustalah. So he's basically doing the fishing for you. He's doing all of the gathering of the discussions for you from different books into one place, just so that you can have it easier to study. And it is a beautiful work, and it is a really good work, and that's why we're going to go through it, inshallah ta'ala. There are other works that are out there. For example, in some specialization courses, they teach al-Raf' wa-al-Takmil. In other ones, they teach other works. And all of these works that exist, there's no doubt that there's khair and benefit in them. However, like I said, like from A to Z, covering all of the topics and literally preparing a student to be able to apply these qawaid, that doesn't really happen in the majority of these specialization courses. Because if you're just going through Fath al-Mughith or Tadrib al-Rawi or even al-Raf' wa-al-Takmil, yes, they're going to bring you very interesting mabahith. And nowhere are we saying that we shouldn't go through these books. So those books have to be referenced as well. And we're not trying to say that a person should not be referencing those works. But at the same time, the bina ilmi, like really preparing a student for the process of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, is not going to happen through Tadrib al-Rawi or through Fath al-Mughith or through Raf' wa-al-Takmil even. Yes, you're going to learn general qawaid, very beneficial qawaid, very beneficial things. But it's not going to create a bina ilmi. It's not going to prepare you to actually apply these qawaid in the same manner. As for Jarḥ and Taʿdīl over here, the whole purpose is to prepare you to apply it. And that's why towards the end of this, we're going to give every single student will take one rawi, and we're going to, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, guide you through how to research that rawi extensively, not a little bit, extensively, inshallah ta'ala, until you get a large amount of research prepared for that one individual rawi, and you're able to present it, and you yourself can research and see how much goes into this process. Because there's another thing that I'll start off with a mention over here, which is that a lot of people think this is very simple. They think it's a very simple process of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, and very quickly people arrive at the conclusion of who's thiqah and who's not thiqah. That is very, very far from true. And the majority of the ruwat, the majority of the narrators, they fall under what we call a gray area. So there's narrators that are 100% guaranteed authentic, they're a'imma. There's narrators that are 100% guaranteed weak. The majority of the narrators are falling not on these extremes, they're falling in the gray area, which is in between the two. And because of that, there's a lot of extensive research that has to be done regarding them. That's why if you remember in Nukhbat al-Fikr, we mentioned that al-Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned that I can't grasp the ta'rif of Hasan properly. Until now, I can't come up with a proper definition of al-Hadith al-Hasan. Because really, what is al-Hadith al-Hasan? It's that gray area that just leans slightly towards the acceptance, or like to be accepted. And likewise, the opposite of that would be the gray area, but it would lean slightly towards not being accepted. And the ijtihād of a muhaddith can change, whether to place a hadith in this category or that category. So this gray area exists, and a lot of it has to do with how do you really determine who's a thiqah and who's not a thiqah, and how do we arrive at a conclusive discussion regarding that. And even before all of that, what are the logical principles that actually lead towards determining authenticity versus the opposite? So these discussions are really important discussions, and it's meant to expand the horizons and really give you a beautiful outlook regarding how this process works. And like I said, it's not a simple process. It's not a very easy process. A lot of ruwat, a lot of narrators, you actually find a lot of khilaf amongst the mutaqaddimin regarding them. And even if you don't, you look into the reasons why, for example, the mutaqaddimun are doing kalam. Is every single kalam acceptable? Are all of the scholars of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl on the same level of acceptance? Number one, who are the scholars of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl? And so on and so forth. So if you were to end up researching a rawi, a narrator, how would you research? How would you go about learning regarding a narrator and gathering all of the quotations and statements of different scholars that are out there? So this is, inshallah ta'ala, the goal of this course. It might be a bit prolonged compared to some of the other courses that we've also done in the specialization program. But that's fine, inshallah ta'ala, as long as you taste a little bit of the beauty of this ilm. So we'll just go through, before we start, the general a table of contents of the actual work to see what we're going to be going through. In the beginning, we always start off by talking about what is Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, right? What is the essence of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl? So he talks about the definition of Jarḥ, lughatan wa salahan, and likewise the definition of Taʿdīl, lughatan wa salahan, and different usages of the word Taʿdīl as a mustalah amongst the muhaddithin, and so on and so forth. This all just regarding what is the reality of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl to begin with. what is this process? Why does this process exist? Sometimes there were some scholars, for example, that might have done kalam upon this. Is this ghiba? Is it not a ghiba? Is it acceptable? Is it not acceptable? To what degree is it acceptable? When is it acceptable? Do we still need to do it today or not? And so on and so forth. All of these discussions. Now, what are the conditions that we're looking for in the rawi to begin with? And how can we do jarh on a rawi if it's done? And so on and so forth. What are the conditions that we're looking for the adalah of the rawi? Now, and then another important discussion he has over here, which is that sometimes jarh and ta'deel is done explicitly with detail as to why the jarh is happening. And likewise, ta'deel is done with detail as to why the ta'deel is happening. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's done in a way which is very generic and very ambiguous, and you're not sure exactly why is the jarh happening. Fulan says he's da'if. Is that enough? A scholar is saying Fulan is da'if, and that's it. We have no idea why he said that. Is that enough? Can we just accept that? Or do we look into it more, and so on and so forth? Now, likewise, he has over here جواب ابن صلاح عما تضمنته كتب الجرح والتعديل من الجروح المبهمة. We have a number of جروح مبهمة that are found in the books of Jarh and Ta'deel. جروح مبهمة not expressed or not detailed, not elaborated upon jarh that occurs upon scholars in the books of Jarh and Ta'deel. Why is that the case? Then you have another really important fasl, which is تعارض الجرح والتعديل. What happens when you have one scholar saying he's ثقة, the other one is saying he's ضعيف? So if you have a contradiction, for example, what do you do in that scenario? And based on that, we have ضوابط. What are the ضوابط? What are the principles? What are the factors that we're going to look at that are going to hint us towards which one we should accept? Should we accept the ta'deel or should we accept the jarh? And then we have al-bab al-thani, which is وجوه الطعن في الراوي. How many ways can ta'an occur in the rawi to begin with? And then he goes on to a long discussion regarding this. So we'll have, for example, ما يتعلق بجهالة الراوي, and likewise ما يختص بالعدالة ومروءة, the concept of muru'ah, and bid'ah, the concept of bid'ah, which is a very, very important discussion as well, and fisq, and التهمة بالكذب, and all of these different ways that ta'an has occurred upon the ruwat. طيب. And there's 10 of them, and we'll go through all of them. Then we have ما لا يتعلق بالعدالة ولا بالضبط غالبا. طيب, sometimes there are forms of jarh and ta'deel that have nothing to do with adalah and ضبط. They're actually external factors, but they can influence our outlook regarding a rawi. So for example, you have tadlis. What is the reality of tadlis? How many types of tadlis are there? How does tadlis take place? And how do we figure out who are the mudallisin? And are there maratib? Are there levels of mudallisin? طيب, who is in which level? Then you have the concept of irsal. And how do we figure out who are the scholars that mainly do irsal? And you have another really interesting one, which is someone who does riwayah often from majhulin and matrukin. Well, he himself is not, in terms of his adalah and ḍabṭ, we don't have anything on it, but he's always narrating from people that are majhul or matruk. Does that actually render him to be from that same category as well? And the next bab is a very important bab, which is that what are the ibarat of jarh and ta'deel? And if you're looking into a work of a scholar, how do you figure out the books of jarh and ta'deel? How do we figure out who is thiqa and who is da'if? What are the ibarat they're going to use? So what's the difference, for example, between saduqun and maqbulun, for example? What's the difference between thiqatun and thiqatun, or akdabun nas, for example, and kadhab, for example? What are the difference between these different terms that you're going to find? And are these terms relative? So this is another discussion, which is that what if these terms altogether are actually just relative terms? Like, according to fulan, this means so and so, but according to fulan, that same term means something else. Can that occur? So the answer is yes. So over there we have mustalahat khassa. Sometimes there's certain mustalahat that you only find with certain a'imma. The mustalahat of Ibn Ma'in or al-Bukhari or Abu Hatim al-Razi, and likewise Daraqutni. Naam. And then you have the maratib of these alfaz. These alfaz, are they all of the same level? The answer is no. There's different levels to these alfaz as well. And these maratib, for example, did the scholars differ regarding them? So the answer is yes. This actually went through a process of evolution. It wasn't always the same. It's not like everyone agreed on the same time, or they all from the very beginning said this is how many maratib there are. There are scholars that came in, they added and they subtracted, and so on and so forth. And you already came across this, alhamdulillah, in Nukhbat al-Fikr. And the different scholars, the maratib they have. So this is a very extensive book. And that's why we said it's going to take some time, inshallah, to go through this, which bi'idhnillahi ta'ala is fine because it is part of mustalah. So it is really part of Tadrib al-Rawi. Like when we come to Tadrib al-Rawi, this discussion, we won't elaborate on it as much simply because we're going to go through this and exhaust this entire discussion in this course, so that when you study into Tadrib al-Rawi, you don't really have to go through with that much detail. We can simply say, you guys can reference or remember what we discussed in the beginning. طيب. So with that being said, inshallah, let's begin. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eases for us the completion of this work, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not deprive of the barakah of this ilm and the barakah of what has been mentioned in this work. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. ربي يسر ولا تعسر وتمم بالخير وبك نستعين يا فتاح. طيب الباب الأول. The first chapter, he says حقيقة الجرح والتعديل وضوابط تعارضهما. The reality of jarh and ta'deel and the ضوابط, what are the different factors that we use in case there is a contradiction between the two. Yani when someone says fulan is ثقة, the other person says fulan is ضعيف. طيب, how do we understand that? He says وفيه فصلان. الفصل الأول حقيقة الجرح والتعديل. الفصل الثاني تعارض الجرح والتعديل. So simply 2 chapters. Number 1, what is the reality of jarh and ta'deel? And number 2, what happens when you have a contradiction in the two of them. طيب. He says تعريف الجرح. الجرح في اللغة الجرح بالفتح التأثير في الجسم بالسلة. What is the actual meaning of jarh? That is to afflict a wound upon someone with a weapon. So a physical wound, a physical injury that you're inflicting upon someone. That is al-jarh bil-fath. Wal-jurh, or al-jarh is the masri ma'na. So the afflicting of the wound, the imposing, or the the inflicting of the actual injury upon the individual. As for jurh with a dhamma, that is in the meaning of the wound itself. So the wound itself is called jurh, the injury itself is called jurh, whereas the afflicting of the wound is jarh. وقال بعض فقهاء اللغة الجرح بالضم يكون في الأبدان بالحديد ونحوه والجرح بالفتح يكون باللسان في المعاني والأعراض ونحوها. Some linguists have differentiated between the two by saying jurh with a dhamma is with regards to any physical injury that occurs upon an individual through either some sort of a metal, meaning some sort of a sword, or anything else for that matter, something that can inflict a physical injury upon an individual. With a dhamma, the physical injury is called jurh. And as for with a fatha, that is a figurative injury. So either someone hurts someone and harms someone through his words, through his speech, through his tongue, or in his honor, and so on and so forth. طيب. Over here in the Hashia, we have some interesting additions sometimes. He says, لم يعرف المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى علم الجرح والتعديل. The ilm of jarh and ta'deel, which is from the anwa' ʿUlūm al-Ḥadīth. The author, he did not give us a definition for it. He only gave us a definition for jarh and ta'deel, the terms themselves, the linguistic terms, and as well as istalahan. But the ilm itself, he didn't define it. So what's the definition of the ilm of jarh and ta'deel? He says, وقد عرفه حاجي خليفة في كشف الظنون بقوله علم الجرح والتعديل هو علم يبحث فيه عن جرح الرواة وتعديلهم بألفاظ مخصوصة وعن مراتب تلك الألفاظ. طيب. What is علم الجرح والتعديل? علم الجرح والتعديل is an ilm in which we study regarding the jarh of the ruwat. And likewise there ta'deel, meaning the accepting of the ruwat or the denouncing of the ruwat, using specific words and the levels of these words. Okay. Now this is a good definition, but it might be restricted or it's a bit limited. In reality, this ilm, it talks about the qawa'id that we're going to use to establish the ruling upon a rawi as he will either be acceptable or non-acceptable. That's the crux of the ilm. That is the gharad of the ilm. So by the end of studying this ilm, the idea in the student or for the student is that he's able to apply this and actually be able to do this. Now, when you study the ilm, then you're going to realize it's a very complicated process. I had some teachers, for example, when we were studying in Jamia, they used to say that, my entire PhD thesis was just regarding a rawi, figuring out whether he's acceptable or not. And he used to say that sometimes we spend months and months and we still can't figure out, do we consider this person acceptable or not? So it is not as simple as you might think it is. It's not as simple as opening the book and, okay, 1 + 1 = 2. That's not how this works. It's a very complicated process. And the problem is there are so many factors and many people in the gray area where there's a reason why you're thinking, oh, he should be acceptable. And there's a reason why you're thinking, oh, he shouldn't be acceptable. And, you go back and forth and it's very difficult to pinpoint. So for this reason, the ulama were very careful regarding. Now, obviously, the entirety of tasheeh and tad'if is based on this. You can't do tasheeh and tad'if, which is to authenticate, or the opposite, without this ilm. You need this ilm. This ilm is a primary, uh, ingredient in tasheeh and tad'if. But the problem arises, which is that it becomes complicated. It's not as simple as what a person might think. So anyhow, this is the definition that he translated of, or the ilmu al-Jarḥ wa-al-Taʿdīl. As for the linguistic definition of jarh, as we were starting, we already mentioned the discussions over there. What is al-Jarḥ fil istilah? Yani the istilahi definition of jarh. He says, وصف الراوي في عدالته أو ضبطه بما يقتضي تليين روايته أو تضعيفها أو ردها. What is the definition of jarh and ta'dil, or jarh specifically istilahan? Describing a narrator in their adalah or in their ḍabṭ. Now there's two things, adalah and ḍabṭ. Adalah has to do with their diyana, to make sure that they're not lying intentionally. And ḍabṭ has to do with retainment, which is to make sure that they're not lying accidentally. And we already mentioned this in Nukhba, which is that any rawi who makes a mistake in a hadith is either for one of two reasons. Okay. A rawi, a narrator who makes a mistake in a narration, is either for one of two reasons. Either he purposely is lying, that's a serious problem, or he is unintentionally lying. He's just making a mistake. It's not really a lie. He's accidentally forgetting the actual narration. That is also a problem. So we have to avoid both of them. So the muhaddithun have one component which they called ta'dil, or they call it, there's one method that they use to avoid the intentional lying, and that is to determine that the rawi is adil. And there's another method, or there's another wasf, a quality that they're trying to look to determine that he is not accidentally making a mistake. And that is what they call ḍabṭ. So when a rawi has both of these, adalah and ḍabṭ, then that rawi, then that narrator is someone who is accepted in this regard. طيب. So what is jarh istilahan? Jarh istilahan is the opposite of either of these two being found in the rawi. So we're finding a quality in the rawi that pertains, or we're finding something in the narrator that pertains to either his adalah or his ḍabṭ. And what we find in this narrator pertaining to either his adalah or his ḍabṭ, it is necessitating from us that we consider his narration either layyin meaning slightly problematic, or da'if, which is a bit more problematic, or we just do rad, like we say we can't accept this narration at all, very problematic. Okay, so there's a spectrum. He mentioned 3 points over here, but really in reality there's a spectrum, right? Where you're going from it's acceptable, the narration is acceptable, or ideally it's completely acceptable, versus acceptable, versus, I'm doubting, I'm questioning this whole situation over here, versus now determining that, okay, you know what, it is a little bit weak, it is a little bit problematic, is lesser than doubting. So one is a person just doubts. But one is like, we're willing to say that, no, this is actually, it's leaning towards the problematic side a little bit, not a lot. And then we get even more clear regarding that, and it gets more, and then eventually it could lead to, we can never ever accept this guy's narration. So any form of quality that we're finding, whether it pertains to the adalah or the ḍabṭ, through which we can determine that, okay, this rawi, his narration is at the very least problematic slightly, if not more problematic, if not completely returned. This is what we call jarh. طيب, he says in the حاشية ومعناه عند الحافظ كما في مقدمة التقريب من ليس له من الحديث إلا القليل ولم يثبت. نعم. Who is someone who, when we say someone is لين الرواية, he says over here, he uses a few terms over here. Number one, ما يقتضي تليين روايته. طيب, how would we describe someone? So I just said, for example, there's acceptable, then acceptable slowly degrades into, he's لين الرواية. He's layyin, and he's soft a little bit. He's not, we can't, we're not really being able to accept it. But neither are we saying he's completely off the charts. He's soft. What is that? Who is described in such a way? So Al-Hafiz, he says, من ليس له من الحديث إلا القليل ولم يثبت فيه ما يترك حديثه من أجله. He says there are some people that have very few ahadith, But in these ahadith, we were not able to find something, a quality through which we should be leaving his ahadith. But at the same time, he has so few ahadith that we're left in this, questionable, confused state. Like, do we really, well, he didn't make any mistakes. We don't find anything which is problematic. But at the same time, is he so trustworthy? We have nothing to look at. So we're left in this interesting state of confusion. This is layin. And regarding jarh, so this was one definition of jarh. Ibn al-Athir, he said, al-Jarḥ wasfun متى التحق بالراوي والشاهد سقط الاعتبار بقوله وبطل العمل به. Jarh is a quality whenever we describe a rawi, a narrator, or a witness with this quality, then his statement is no longer considered mu'tabar, it's no longer considered valid, and we don't act upon his statement. We're not acting upon his statement. طيب. Then he says, نعم فالموصوف بما يقتضي تليين روايته هو الصدوق سيء الحفظ تتقوى روايته بوجود قرينة مرجحة لجانب ضبطه لحديث معين. Really interesting. Now that we said, so this is where you understand that this is not actually black and white. There's room for flexibility over here a little bit. Now that we said this is a spectrum, and you want to think of it as a spectrum. So again, let's say there is, just make a spectrum. This is 100%. Like whenever you come across this rawi, you're like, no, you know what? This guy, like, he's just check marks, like all around. Like this guy who's check marks all around can still make mistakes. It doesn't mean every single narration he narrates is sahih. Okay, and more regarding that will come, inshallah, in the books of Mustalah. We'll talk about it. And then you have one guy who's 0%, right? 0%, seriously problematic. And the way this guy is just X is cancelled completely. Now, technically, he could speak the truth too. Like this individual who's cancelled completely, can he never speak the truth? No, of course he can. We're not saying he never ever can speak the truth. He can speak the truth. In fact, who do we know? This is 100%, guys, worse than everyone else, right? 100% he falls in this category. Who do we know, guys? What do you guys think? What's one individual? But one being that 100% is in this category before everyone else. In fact, because of him, everyone else gets in this category. Shaitan. Shaitan is the greatest one who deserves to be in this category. But yet the Messenger also said regarding Shaitan, when the famous hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, where Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu was left in charge of taking care of the mal of sadaqah in the masjid. And every night there was some beggar that used to come and try and take the wealth, and Abu Hurairah would say, this is the wealth of sadaqah, what are you doing? And he would say that I have this issue and I have that issue and I won't come again. And Abu Hurairah would say, okay, you can take. And he would take, and then he would come next night, until 3 nights later, Abu Hurairah was like, that's it, you're not coming anymore. So then he said to Abu Hurairah, I'll tell you one thing, that if you read it, then you'll be protected every single night. And what is it? Ayatul Kursi. And then he left. The next morning, when Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, we mentioned this to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Messenger said sallallahu alayhi wasallam to Abu Hurairah that your visitor, meaning your guest that was coming to you and taking the wealth every single night, that was shaitan. And then he said, وَقَدْ صَدَقَكَ وَهُوَ كَذُوب. Yani, last night, though, he spoke the truth to you. He told you the truth, even though he's kadoob, and he's a complete liar. But he still spoke the truth. So if shaitan can speak the truth, then obviously people can speak the truth. Okay. So again, when we say someone's on 100%, doesn't mean they can't make a mistake. And likewise, when we say when someone's on 0%, doesn't mean they can never speak the truth. However, we're looking from a different perspective. We're looking from the perspective that what is more likely to be the case. Okay, and this takes us to another point, which is that again, in when we mentioned that in these qawa'id, as we study jarh and ta'dīl, or not only jarh and ta'dīl, the qawa'id al-mustalah, we want to go back to the idea or the logical premises that these qawa'id are based on. The logical premises that these qawa'id are based on. So from a logical perspective, we would say for this individual to make a mistake, it's jaiz aqlan. And likewise, for this individual to speak the truth is jaiz aqlan. Okay. But do we simply make the judgment based on al-jawaz al-aqli? Of course not. That's stupidity. It's jaiz aqlan, for example, as we are listening to this lesson, and like say for example, outside you have your car parked in the driveway. It's jaiz aqlan that car could turn into gold. That's jaiz aqlan, technically. It's mumkin. It's not something which is a logical impossibility. It's logically falls within the realm of contingency, which is imkan. It's possible. Like, do you think that happened? Of course not. In fact, you have yaqeen it didn't happen. So just because something is jaiz aqlan doesn't mean that you're not able to develop certainty that it didn't occur. Okay. Doesn't mean that you're not able to develop certainty that it didn't occur. Something can be jaiz aqlan, okay, but you can still develop certainty that it didn't happen. And or you can develop a very strong probability that it didn't happen in your mind. And so we say, just like fiqh, the ahkam of fiqh are mabni upon ghalabat al-dhann. And normally there's a qaida which says ghalabat al-dhann tunazzilu manzilat al-yaqeen. In fiqh they mention this qaida. Likewise, the same qawaid, we're going to use these same logical premises regarding hadith, which is that the qawaid that we're going to determine in these books of mustalah. The point over here is not to determine or not to arrive at certainty in the sense of the mutakallimun or in the sense of the usuliyun when they say certainty, when they say al-ilm in their language or in their fun, in their discipline. The point over here is to arrive at a relative degree of probability that we're going to treat like certainty. And for an individual or relative to a certain individual, it might even be certain for him that there's no way that this person spoke the truth. That can happen, even if it falls under the realm of jaiz aqlan. طيب. So, نعم للأكثر حكم الكل or غلبة الظن تنزل منزلة اليقين. You can word this like approach, this logical approach in many different ways. All of it goes back to the same point. طيب, so you have two extremes. You have the 100% and you have the 0%. And then you have, like, let's say for example, the center, we're going to call it acceptable, right? 50%, anything. Now this is just taqriban lil-fahm. Obviously, even these numbers there's no way to pinpoint exact numbers. 50%, everything on this side of 50, we're going to say is acceptable, right? And the more it gets closer to the 100, then the more acceptable it becomes, the more content you are, the more at peace you are when you see the name of that individual. So when you see his name, there's some people, for example, you see their name and you're just like, you know what, alhamdulillah, he came, that's it, I have no problem. Like, you just feel at peace, at ease. And there's some people, you see their name and you're like, you know, you're not at that type of ease, but you still are relatively, okay, you know what, usually he's fine. But then there's some people where it drops beneath that a little bit. There's some people where it drops beneath that a little bit. Like, now it can drop anywhere. It can drop like over here. It can drop here. It can drop here. And it can get closer to the end as well. And depending on where it drops, that is what we consider that individual. However, look, if it drops over here, right, we're not going to treat this person, and it makes no sense to do that. We're not going to treat this individual the way we would treat this individual. That makes no sense. If it drops over here, and we just need a little bit of a push. We just need a little bit of a push, and then we can figure it out, and we can be like, you know, mashal hal, it works. So, anything that drops over here possibly somehow come over to this side a little bit? The answer is yes. They can be external factors. Now, not based on adalah and ḍabṭ, not based on the rawi himself, not based on our understanding of that rawi, but there can be external factors that can give that little push and shove that allows us to take that rawi and his hadith can become acceptable. It can happen. Like, what are some of these external factors? And that's what we say over here. That's what he says over here. Al-mawsuf bima yaqtadi talyin riwayatihi. If we call someone layyin riwayah, yani he's layyin, then number one, we say huwa saduq sayyi al-hifz. This is one of the wordings that are used to describe this type of an individual. However, تتقوى روايته بوجود قرينة مرجحة لجانب ضبطه لحديث معين. نعم. His riwayah can actually become strong enough for us to somehow push it over to this side as well. If you have external qara'in, if you have certain qara'in that would suggest that in this specific case, he got it, he remembered it. Because again, the whole point over here is we don't have an issue with his adalah, the issue is with his ḍabṭ, the issue is with his retainment. And now because his retainment is slightly, you know, not really acceptable, he's a bit less than 50, he's not giving us that final, you know, push. But there might be a certain factor that we are able to find, a qarina, we call it a qarina. It might be a certain factor that we're able to find. And because of that factor, we're like, no. In this situation, most likely he remembered it. Right? we're looking for hints that tell us that he remembered what he's talking about. That normally where he makes a lot of mistakes, we're able to overlook that, the fact that he normally is making mistakes, and we're able to determine that over here he most probably got it right. So it increases our ability to decipher. So again, look, this is not black and white, guys. We're determining he is sayyul hifl, but yet at the same time, he has mistakes. A lot of sayyul hifl is someone who makes mistakes. But at the same time, there are certain times where we can tell that he figured it out. He knows what he's talking about. Like, what are some of these qara'in? He says in the hashiyah, no. There are qara'in murajjiha. And this is, mashallah, he mentions quite a bit, and we'll go through this, inshallah. It's nice. He says, من القرائن المرجحة لجانب ضبط الراوي. What are some of the qara'in? What are some of the hints that we can find that would allow us to lean towards that we're going to accept his riwayah as opposed to deny it? Number one, أن يحدث هذا الراوي من كتابه فإنه حدث من كتابه وكان ضابطا له قبل حديثه. One of the greatest qara'in is that the rawi, he actually brings out his book and he reads from the book. If you describe a rawi as being sayyi al-hifz, your issue is with his memory, not with his book. The issue is with his memory itself. You know that he makes mistakes when he narrates from his memory. But that's the benefit of having a book. If someone has a book, and a lot of people nowadays, for example, they make mistakes narrating from their memories, but they don't make mistakes in relaying information. Why? Because they have it recorded. They have the information stored. They have it written down. Why do people write down information? So that when they actually do relay it, they don't make mistakes relaying it. So now that they're relaying the information and they have it written down, they have it stored, they're able to relay it properly. You wouldn't doubt the relaying of the information even though you don't actually rely on his memory. In fact, realistically, guys, the majority of the people today, we don't rely on their memory at all. We know for a fact that the majority of humans that exist right now on the planet Earth, and there's a lot of them, but the majority of them, they are very terrible in their memorization. You wouldn't trust them in memorizing anything, not even a phone number. But yet, you do not doubt every single information that they're relaying. So it tells you that even if you're determining that people are not good at memorizing and retaining, that doesn't mean I need to doubt every single information that they relay. In fact, quite the contrary. The reality is, in today's time and age, we don't doubt the majority of the relaying of information that occurs in front of us, simply because people are known to be, not good at memorizing. You don't doubt your own statements. You don't doubt, for example, when someone else comes and tells you something. So the relaying of information that's occurring upon the tongues of other individuals, we're not doubting it. Why are we not doubting it? The reason we don't end up doubting this information is because we know that there's other ways of relaying and retaining information as well. And we also know one more thing. There's a difference, guys. There's a difference between memorizing a concept or remembering a concept versus memorizing words. That's also something that we know consciously. So, for example, I might know that this person is very bad at memorizing words. Sometimes this actually happens. Someone comes and tells you that, you remember back in the days, we used to do this and this, and you remember that happened and so happened. And you're thinking, you're scratching your head going like, I have no idea when this happened. But someone else is able to relay that information. But that someone else might not be the best at memorizing if you give him a book and tell him memorize something directly. They might not be able to do it. They might find that difficult. They might not be able to focus their mind and actually sit down and just memorize words. And people that forget the events might be able to memorize words. Like if you give them a book and you tell them, okay, you know what, tafaddal, and you have 30 minutes, memorize this, they might just, bang their head on it and be able to memorize it. That can happen. So we ourselves are experiencing, and this is the beauty of actually this whole ilm al-mustalah. We ourselves actually experience it practically in our lives, but not in relation to the narration of the messenger or the statements of the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In relation to statements of people that are being relayed to you, in relation to, information that you're receiving regarding people. You experience it. Everyone experiences it on a daily basis. Okay. And because of our experience of this, now we need to bring the same logic and approach that we are dealing with in our daily, dealings and so on and so forth over here as well. But at the same time, we get that the muhaddithun had a little bit more ihtiyat. They were a bit more cautious. And the reason they put these qawa'id down is to express that caution, because these are not normal statements. These are the statements of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So طيب, that's number one. Then he says, ولا يشترط في الراوي أن يجمع بين حفظ الصدر وحفظ الكتاب وعليه جمهور العلماء. طيب, So based on this, we say there's two types of ḍabṭ, and this is going to come anyways, which is ضبط الصدر and ضبط الكتاب. You can remember something or retain something by way of memorizing it, and you can also retain something by way of it simply being mentioned in your book. It's related in your book. Because again, guys, the purpose of ilm al-hadith is not to determine who memorized the hadith or not. The purpose is to determine that this individual who's relaying the narration, can we trust this to be the statement of the messenger or not? The point is not to figure out did someone memorize the hadith or not. That's what they do when they prepare for competitions in memorizing a hadith. That's over there. That was never the purpose of ilm al-hadith. The purpose of ilm al-hadith was not this. It was actually to determine, can we trust that this is a relaying of the statement of the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not? That's it. Nothing else. Like, so because now you can retain the statement of the messenger through two ways. Through either memorizing it, and that was something people used to do back in the days, because this was all obviously before the introduction of all of the technologies and what you have nowadays, and even books, for example, were not commonly written, and people were not commonly writing books, and so on and so forth. Paper was also scarce in the beginning. Yeah, obviously, all of this increased. It became more and more. People found this more and more, or they were able to write more and more. But at the same time, people used to memorize a lot. They were known to memorize. And you still have that in certain areas in the world right now as well. So they did this, but were the majority of people relying on their memory? The answer is 100% no. In fact, the majority of muhaddithun as well, when we say they're thiqa, we're not saying that based off their memories. This is also a misunderstanding some students of hadith have. Because you read in some books that they say the memory of the Arabs back in the day was amazing. Like, that doesn't mean the majority of them were memorizing. Okay, neither does it mean that majority of the time we were saying fulan is thiqa, we're relying solely based on his ability to memorize and retain. That's not usually the case. Usually the case is that he had a book and he was reading out of the book, and because of that, he wasn't making mistakes. So simply the fact that he wasn't making mistakes, when you compare his narrations when you cross-compare his narration with the narrations of everyone else who's narrating from the same teachers as him, we generally don't find him making mistakes. That's how we classify him as a thiqa. So it's a backwards trajectory. It's not, let's look at him directly and see if he memorizes or he's good. No one was, they weren't going around testing people's memory. That happened, but it wasn't normally the case. How would you determine that someone is a thiqa? Simply by looking at his narrations and comparing them with the narrations of his aqran. Does he seem like he's generally narrating the same thing they're narrating, or is he normally making mistakes? That's it. That is a way to determine the hukum. طيب, he says وعليه جمهور العلماء واشترطه مالك وأبو حنيفة. طيب, he says Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa rahimahullah consider this to be a shart, which is that أن يجمع بين حفظ الصدر وحفظ الكتاب. طيب, this is an interesting discussion. Like, what did Abu Hanifa consider a shart, and what did Imam Malik consider a shart? In their books of usul, you'll find this more extensively mentioned. But Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, if you're going to rely on the hifz, you have to understand the conditions over here, right? If you're going to rely on the hifz, and if one of you can actually open up the dirasat or al-madkhal ila usul al-hadith and al-Hanafiyya and just search up exactly the exact wording that they have over there. The Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was seeming to suggest that if you're going to rely on someone's memory, like if we're trying to rely solely on their memory, and wallahu alam, this is what I understand, but we can further research this and look into this more, inshallah. But if you're going to rely solely on their memory, then their memory needs to be absolutely exceptional. Like, this was his main point. As for the one who you're not relying solely on their memory, right? Rather, you're relying on their written book and so on and so forth. The fact that they're using a written book to relay the hadith. In that too, Abu Hanifa was shadid a little bit. So in reality, guys, this is actually a misunderstanding. People think Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was easygoing when it comes to accepting hadith. No. Bil-aks. He was actually more shadid. His conditions are very strict when it comes to accepting narrations of the Messenger, especially the ahad. That's why the majority of his madhab is not founded upon the ahad, because he's not willing to trust these narrations to begin with. So if anything, his conditions that he actually placed for the acceptance of the narrations, those are more strict conditions in comparison to even the muhaddithun. And that's why Abu Hanifa, he didn't find his madhab, or he didn't base his madhab off of the ahad as opposed to the muhaddithun, the majority of their madhab is based off of ahad. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, he said we have an amount of nusus and evidences which we know 100% are trustworthy. That's what they call, for example, mashhur, or they call it mutawatir. We know for a fact that the messenger said this. We know for a fact this is in the Quran. We're going to use these and understand based on these. As for those narrations people are mentioning here and there, and someone is narrating here, and Abu Hanifa majority of the times was not taking it because he had strict conditions, more strict than even the muhaddithin when it comes to accepting the narrations. Okay, so one of the conditions he used to mention over there is that the one who narrates from his memory should be so exceptional that whenever he wants, he can actually do istihdar, he can actually remember the statement whenever he wants, like directly. Now, how often is that? That's not realistic. That's very uncommon for a person to be able to, whenever he wants to do istihdar of a statement, he can remember it word by word. That's not common. That's difficult. Okay, and likewise, adding more conditions in the rawi in order for him to be acceptable. طيب. He says وقد عبر الإمام الشافعي عن هذا الأصل حيث قال ومن كثر غلطه من المحدثين ولم يكن له أصل كتاب صحيح لم يقبل حديثه كما يكون من أكثر الغلط في الشهادة لم تقبل شهادته. يعني Imam Shafi'i رحمه الله تعالى, he also alluded towards this fact through a different type of a statement where he said the one who makes a lot of mistakes from the muhaddithin and he doesn't have a kitab that he is going back to. He doesn't have some sort of a book that he's going back to. Okay, يعني what that means is that if he had a book, then we would not be so strict with his narrations. We would be willing to accept his narrations. Like, there's an interesting point over here, which is that if the ḍabṭ of this individual is based on his book, like if we're basing it on the fact that he has a book, then, like, I'll give you guys an interesting question. If we say that he's on this side of the spectrum, right over here, and we're saying if he has a book, like that book is able to bring him over here. That's what we're saying. In reality, if he has a book and is relying on the book solely, shouldn't that bring him all the way over here? You should be able to just trust his narration because he's just reading off of a book at that point. It's literally zero reliance on his memory altogether. The ḍabṭ is ضبط الكتاب. The ḍabṭ as a ضبط is ضبط الكتاب. It's zero reliance on his memory. So if we know for a fact that he's reading out of a book, then that should literally just take his narration, and the book is obviously prepared. Like book has its own conditions. How can we guarantee that the book is correct? But if he's reading off a book directly, that should technically bring his narration all the way to 100% we can accept. Like we're very strongly understandable regarding the narration. That is the case. The problem is over here. Just the fact that he makes a lot of mistakes leaves a little bit of a bitter taste in the mouth. Yes, in comparison to the ones that don't. So that bitter taste is reflected by us still having a little bit of a question mark in our mind regarding that rawi, just in general whenever he comes. So yes, the book is able to make us accept his narration, and we're able to consider his narration acceptable. But are we going to take his narration whenever he comes, and we know for a fact that he's reading out of a book? Are we going to really consider it in a way that we say that it's impossible that he could have made a mistake? Just because he is sayyul hifd, it leaves a bitter taste in the mouth. So there's, in reality, the kathra, the excessiveness of the making of mistakes of the muhaddith. Now, another beautiful point is that if muhaddithun know this, if there's certain ruwat, they know for a fact that if I try and do it off of memory and I make mistakes, they're going to call me out on it, and it's going to harm me, and it's going to hurt me, and people will not be willing to take my narrations. If they know this is a fact, then wouldn't they try their hardest to avoid saying stuff off of their memory as much as they can? Of course they would. And that is what we want to attain. We want people to be more careful. We want people to be more considerate. We want people to be more, before they just go around saying anything, we want them to be, think it twice, think it thrice, think it 4 times through, think it 5 times through. Make sure that they know what they're going to say. Okay, because they know that there's consequences behind this. Because if I mess up and they pick up that I'm making mistakes off of my memory, then that's not smart. I'm not going to get away with this. They're going to call me out on it, and it's going to hurt me. So just a lack of reliance on memory for the people that know that they make a lot of mistakes in their memory, if we're able to increase that awareness, that in of itself is matlub. That in of itself is a great accomplishment that we've attained, because it makes people more careful regarding the statements of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'll give you an example that can occur nowadays regarding stuff like this, right? There's a lot of speakers that go around giving speeches. Now, they just quote everything off the top of their minds and they have no idea where they're getting it from. So they're willing to make statements off the top of their head and they're making mistakes, and they're not really conscious or they don't really care. If you start calling people out on this, and this has happened, the next time they do it, they will be 10 times more careful because they know they're going to get called out. They know they're going to get called out. This is kind of the benefit of this whole process of jarh. Right? Someone might think that, okay, you know what, jarh, calling people out, canceling people, it's a little bit problematic. Yes, and if it goes to an extreme, it definitely is problematic. We shouldn't take these things to an extreme. But at the same time, telling people, reminding people, okay, wait, where are you getting this story from? Where are you getting this narration from? Where'd you hear this from? What's your reference? Where'd you get this from? It makes people think twice and thrice and 4 times and 5 times and a lot before they actually relay information. And we want this because the deen is not a joke. We don't want every random person speaking regarding the deen as he pleases. We don't want any random person speaking regarding the deen as he pleases. The problem is this can be abused. This power can be abused. So we're going to mention as well in the scholars of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, there are certain sifat that these scholars have to have. If they don't have them, then they're signing themselves up for a lot of trouble, because these are the a'rad of the people. That's why Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, he said there's two groups of individuals. They're standing at the edge of Jahannam. Like, they're not dealing with light things, very, very intricate and problematic stuff. Two groups of individuals literally standing at the edge of Jahannam. The muluk, the kings. Okay, because why the kings? Because blood for them is cheap. They can kill people. And their ahkam, their rulings and their decisions and their judgments, they are implemented and imposed on people. So if they make a mistake, if they do something wrong, that is a big problem. They can be held accountable big time. That's one group. And the second group are the muhaddithun. Why the muhaddithun? The reason why the second group is the muhaddithun is because, on one hand, the muluk had the blood of these individuals in their hands, and they had to be careful regarding it. The muhaddithun have the a'rad of these individuals in their hands. If you come across a rawi and you read that he is da'if, what is that like in your mind? What do you think regarding that person? And I would advise everyone, don't rush to conclusions. Go read his tarjumah. He might be one of the greatest awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in ilm al-hadith, they might call him da'if. In fact, there's one category, they say the sulaha, the righteous folks, the righteous meaning the righteous individuals, they are known to do wada of hadith because, whatever they hear, they pass it on. They don't really think twice regarding it. Not by intent. That's just the way they are, relaxed individuals. So you have to be careful. You have to be very conscious. And if you end up speaking ill regarding an individual who ended up being an awali from the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you were the one who shouldn't have said what you said. Okay, just because someone makes a mistake, doesn't mean you can call them out as you please to call them out. It doesn't work like that. If someone is, we say, لبعض الناس سوابق إن الحسنات يذهبن السيئات. There are people that have so much good. 1, 2, 3 mistakes, Allah Himself just goes like, no problem, man, it's fine. Even the sinners Allah is forgiving of. Allah will not be forgiving of His most righteous servants. Of course He will. So there are some people that have sacrificed so much, and this is another thing people have to keep in mind. Whenever you speak ill of ulama, anyone who speaks down upon ulama, be careful. Be careful. If you're not an alim and you're treating an alim in a certain way, be careful. An alim did not yesterday start acting upon the deen. He probably has 20, 30, 40 years of sacrifice in this deen on a daily basis, just khidmah of the deen. On a daily basis, just from morning till night, he's on the deen. And you have random people that don't know how to pray Surah Fatiha and they want to point fingers at the ulama. This is a very dangerous disease. If it enters into a person, it's a big problem. طيب, who are you? What's your resume? What have you proven? What have you done? That is what a person has to be careful of. And who are you talking about? What's their resume? What have they proven? What have they done? And look at their whole life. And then after that, a person should speak. But this is the problem. When a person is ignorant and we have another issue nowadays, which is that, people don't even know they don't even understand what ilm is. Like, once upon a time, they would at least understand fulan is an alim, just be careful, treat him well. Now they don't even understand who an alim is. Like, when they see an alim, they don't recognize the ulama. Okay, they're more worried about running after, for example, famous people, whatever else, celebrities. But the ulama, for example, there might be an alim, for example, and just because they're down to earth, for example, or just because they're easygoing, or just because they don't carry themselves like with a chip on their shoulder, then people are willing to speak over them or override them and so on and so forth. This is not munasib. فكل يعني يخاف على نفسه. Everyone should be afraid of themselves. And everyone knows best regarding themselves. And أصلا يعني a person doesn't consider someone else or is careful how he speaks to someone else. But regarding ulama in general, like the reason I'm saying this is because you have some people right now, nowadays, for example, they're talking about Al-Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala with negativity. Like, who was Al-Imam al-Nawawi, ya ahbab? We read his tarjama not too many days ago. Like, and half of these fools, may Allah forgive them. May Allah forgive them and guide them. Ignorant fools. They don't even know Arabic to be able to read the biographies of these ulama they're talking about. They just hear, it's hearsay. They don't even know if they're right in what they're saying. Literally just hearsay. Fulan is kada and kada, and I heard from so and so, and therefore I can talk about him all I want. This is a sign of deprivation. The person is mahroom by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he إذا أطلق لسانه على كبار أهل العلم. Okay, when he just simply thinks that all he could think of talking about, he had no khair to say. The Messenger said, من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. هذا لم يجد خيرا ليقله. And instead of saying something virtuous or something of good, he just decided to speak ill of the scholars and the ulama. And he made them his targets. And he started shooting at them day and night. This is, may Allah forgive us, a big fitna and a big problem. طيب. الأدب قبل كل شيء. And the only way a person can develop adab is he has to recognize his own state and what he is and who he is and what his level is. And only then can he develop adab. But if someone is so egotistical, they're not willing to recognize that, they have a long way to go in this journey. And they do, and I guarantee you guys, remember this, guys, when you see people that their shi'ar is fulan is a mubtadi', fulan is kada, fulan is kada, this alim was kada, this alim was kada. If this is their shi'ar, if this is the way their life is, then know that these people are mahroom from the nur of ilm, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. They're mahroom. This wasn't the tariqah of the anbiya. This wasn't the tariqah of the sulaha. Even these scholars of Jarḥ and Taʿdīl, they were so scared when they would speak regarding these individuals. And they would do jarh upon people. طيب. I remember one time we were going through, like when we were studying Jarḥ and Taʿdīl in Jami', there's one student that asked one of the teachers, he said, Shaykh, what do you think about this nowadays? Like, should we do Jarḥ and Taʿdīl upon ulama? And the Shaykh is like scratching his head. He's like, you're in like, you barely started Jami', you barely started university, you want to do Jarḥ and Taʿdīl? You want to do jarh upon people? And what kind of an ego does a person have to even think that thought? Right? To think like that I should be calling other people out. I should be doing islah of other people. The thought of wanting to do islah requires islah, ahbab. A normal, sane individual is not thinking, I want to fix other people. He's worried about himself. He's genuinely worried about himself. He's not thinking, I got to fix other people. Let people be the way they are. Like, I don't have to answer on behalf of anyone. I need to worry about myself. That is what normal people are thinking about. They're not thinking about, let me go and figure out what he's doing wrong and what he's doing right and what this leaving your tongue free upon people. This is very, very dangerous. واضح? نعم. So, and I know the student too that asked this question. Like, he was my classmate, obviously, right? And like, not really a genius, nothing, barely knew anything. And just like he maybe heard one lecture of some scholar that was, very relaxed in this regard. He's like, Sheikh, should we be doing jarh on people? Should we be warning against people? This is what do you mean warning against people? Based on what? نعم. والله المستعان. Anyhow, he says, وقال الحميدي فأما من اقتصر على ما في كتابه فحدث به ولم يزد ولم ينقص منه ما يغير معناه ورجع عما يخالف فيه بوقوف منه عن ذلك الحديث عما يخالف فيه بوقوف منه عن ذلك الحديث أو الاسم الذي خولف فيه من الإسناد ولم يغيره فلا يطرح حديثه فلا يكون ذلك ضارا في حديثه إذا لم يرزق من الحفظ والمعرفة بالحديث ما رزق غيره. يا سلام. إذا اقتصر على ما في كتابه ولم يقبل التلقين. نعم, this is a really important faida. What does al-Humaydi say? He says, as for that rawi, he relies only on his book. He doesn't want to go beyond his book. He narrates exactly what's in the book. لم ي- لا يزيد ولا ينقص. And he doesn't increase, not decrease. Just exactly what's in the book, that's what he narrates. And any narration where he has been differed, like someone else differed with him regarding that narration, he stops narrating it. He's careful. He's like, you know what? The moment I found out that someone else is narrating this in a different way, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not going to narrate it. احتياطا. أو عن الاسم الذي خُلِف فيه. Or maybe, for example, a name. He narrated a certain way, someone else narrated a different way, and he stops. He's like, let me leave it simply because there was khilaf. Okay, but he doesn't change. So this is really interesting. There's two problems here, guys. Let's say this individual in his book, he has the name written a certain way, and the name is wrong. And in someone else's book, it's written the right way. Now he doesn't know, like obviously he doesn't know exactly 100% sure that he's wrong and that like he has it written the way it is. Then he finds out, like he's reading the hadith and someone tells him, oh, you know what, this name, Fulan narrates it differently. The wording of this hadith, Fulan narrates it differently. He's like, oh, really? And he's like, okay, wait, 1 second. Let me fix it. How does the Fulan narrate it? Like, tell me how he narrates it. And he starts fixing it. He's like, let me fix it. No, this word is incorrect. What is it? Okay, and he starts writing it. Like, if someone does that, we say ma'as-salam. Because what is that telling us? That means you have no conscious of what your book is. You have no reliance upon your book. You have no trust in your own work. You have no trust in what you wrote. You have no idea. You're just completely doubtful regarding what you wrote yourself. So how can we trust everything else that you wrote? Okay. So if he changes it just because someone else is narrating a different way, that's a problem. And if he narrates it the way he wrote it and someone else who's stronger than him is narrating a different way, that's also a problem for him. So what should he do? He just leaves it. Don't narrate it. Just forget about it. Forget about this hadith altogether. Forget about the name altogether. Don't narrate it. Like, he says, فَلَا يَكُونُ ذَلِكَ ضَارًا فِي حَدِيثِهِ. Now, if this is the case of an individual, all he does is narrates from his book. He doesn't go beyond the book, and so on and so forth. That's not going to be such where it's detrimental upon his narrations, even if he wasn't granted the same memorization and knowledge of hadith that someone else was granted. Why? Because he's relying on his book. Because he's relying on it. In fact, a person like this can become a great muhaddithin, from the greatest muhaddithin. Thiqatun thiqa. Why? All he did was narrate from his book. He never ever narrated from his memory, for example. That can happen. طيب. نعم. Then he says, وقد عقد الخطيب في الكفاية فصلا عن في أن سيء الحفظ لا يعتد من حديثه إلا بما رواه من أصل كتابه، وذكر بأسانيده قال عفان حدثنا همام يوما بحديث فقيل له فيه، فدخل فنظر في كتابه فقال ألا أراني أخطئ وأنا لا أدري، فكان بعد يتعاهد كتابه. نعم. um, so he narrated this incident. قال ابن عمار نعم شريك كتبه صحاح، فمن سمع منه من كتبه فهو صحيح. قال ولم يسمع من شريك من كتابه إلا إسحاق الأزرق. قال يحيى بن سعيد إذا حدثكم المعتمر بن سليمان بشيء فأعرضوه فإنه سيء الحفظ، ونصوص الأئمة في ذلك كثيرة. يعني there's a lot of nusus of the Imam regarding this, that even if someone is سيء الحفظ, but when he's narrating from his book, we can still accept it. قال أحمد في رواية الأثرم في حاتم بن إسماعيل المدني، حاتم بن إسماعيل أحب إلي من الدراوردي، زعموا أنه كان فيه غفلة إلا أن كتابه صالح. يا سلام. He says they used to say that he has غفلة, however his book is good. وقال الإمام أحمد في أبي عبيدة عبد الواحد بن واصل الحداد لم يكن صاحب حفظ, he was not someone of memory or a strong memory, إلا أن أبا عبيدة كان كتابه صحيحا, but his book was صحيح. So you find this distinction explicitly amongst many kalam of the muhaddithin, where they differentiate between someone narrating from their book and someone relying on their memory. From the Quran as well, he says أن يكون الراوي من أثبت الناس في شيخه. يا سلام. Really important as well. We say there are two things that we look at. When we look at ضبط, it's not only about memory. There's something else too. And what is that? That is mulazama. Mulazama. Okay. It's not just about memory. It's also about mulazama. The person who spent 10 years with one sheikh is not like the one who's seen him for 1 week, or spent 1 month with him, or spent 1 year with him. The student that was 10 years with one sheikh Okay, knows everything regarding the Shaykh, and especially if he's a close student and he's a mu'taqid and he loves the Shaykh and so on and so forth. He knows a lot regarding the Shaykh, inside out. He's not like the one who spent only 1 month or 1 week with that Shaykh. So sometimes a qusur, a weakness in memory, can actually be overlooked by another quality within the Rawi himself, which is kathratul mulazama. That he spent a lot of time with his Shaykh. Okay, this is where we call man athbatu nasi fi shaykhihi. Sometimes when it comes to mulazama can actually overlook سيء الحفظ. طيب فلا يطلق الأئمة على راو أنه أثبت في شيخه إلا على من هو متقن لحديث شيخه فهذه ترفع رتبة حديثه إلى الاحتجاج لهذه القرينة. ومن أمثلة examples of this هشام بن سعد المدني فيه لين وضعف. يعني he has lean, يعني he has issues in his memory, he makes mistakes. لكن أبا داود قال, Abu Dawood said regarding him, هشام بن سعد أثبت الناس في زيد بن أسلم. طيب, what does this tell you guys? What does this tell us? In reality, it's relative. It is relative to so many different factors. Even hifl, like this is the point. Like the idea that you say Fulan is hafil, like he memorized, he has a good memory. Fulan doesn't have a good memory. That doesn't make any sense. Like what if, like for example, if you test me regarding the book that I reviewed, for the last hour, I'm going to be strong in my memory. If you test me regarding a book that I didn't look at for the last 10 years, I'm going to be weak in my memory. So what determines the strength of my memory? Is it my ability to quickly memorize, or is it my ability to retain? If it's ability to retain what? So this stuff is relative. It's relative to a lot of different factors. And from those factors is that really what we're looking at is how many mistakes are being made. Am I continuously making mistakes? Am I constantly making mistakes? Even if I'm making mistakes, at times there can be factors that allows people to overlook my mistakes. And that could be, for example, that I was very close to a certain teacher and I stayed with him for a long period of time. Enough that I don't make mistakes regarding him. In fact, I am closer to that teacher than the majority of the ones that are narrating from that teacher. And so therefore, I am stronger when it comes to the hadith of that teacher than the majority of the students that are narrating from that teacher, even if when it comes to the other teachers, I'm not aware of them like that. And this is also something experienced by every single individual. This is a natural thing which is experienced by everyone. We all have certain shuyukh that we spend a lot of time with. We understand their mizaj, we understand their temperament, we're able to digest and understand the way they are as individuals. But regarding those shuyukh, we are the people that should be addressed, or we are the people that should be approached regarding what those shuyukh say and what they're upon, because we've been with them for so long. But as for like that same individual, you take him and put him with another sheikh and give 1 week and then test him regarding that sheikh, he's not going to be able to give you precise answers. He's going to make mistakes. So sometimes we say the mistakes are problematic unless he's narrating from Fulan. In that situation, we don't think he's making mistakes. He's actually telling the truth. In fact, he's even better than people that normally we say their memory is good. That can also happen. But he says, نعم هشام بن سعد أثبت الناس في زيد بن أسلم. And when it comes to Zayd ibn Aslam specifically, Hisham ibn Sa'd is the strongest. Yes, regarding everyone else, he has lean, he makes mistakes. وأخرج العلامة الوادعي في الصحيح المسند مما ليس في الصحيحين 10 أحاديث من طريقه عن زيد بن أسلم. نعم. He mentioned in his Sahih Musnad, al-Wadi'i, he mentions in his Sahih al-Musnad, ahadith that are not in Sahihain, 10 narrations of Hisham ibn Sa'd from the tariq of Zayd ibn Aslam. Why was he willing to put this in Sahih, in his Sahih Musnad, the Musnad that he compiled only for authentic narrations? Because he considered this scenario to be such that it's acceptable. ومن أمثلة ذلك يحيى بن سليم الطائفي في رواية عن عبد الله بن عثمان بن خثيم قال الإمام أحمد في يحيى بن سليم كان يكثر الخطأ. He used to make a lot of mistakes. وروى عبد الله عنه أنه قال, but Imam Ahmad himself regarding him said also, regarding Abdullah ibn Uthman ibn Khuthaym, كان قد أتقن حديث ابن خثيم كانت عنده في كتاب فقلنا له أعطنا كتابك فقال أعطوني مصحفا رهنا قلنا من أين لنا مصحف ونحن غرباء. We wanted to take the book from him to double check it. He's like, give me a mushaf as rahan. How do I know you're not going to take my book and run away with it and not give it back to me? Like, this is my precious book, it's my hadith. How can I give it to you? How can I lend you a book? So they said that we don't have a mushaf to give as rahan, so they didn't end up taking the book. But he used to say that he did do itqan of the hadith of fulan. So this can be relative as well. What does that mean? This brings us a really interesting point. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail, inshallah, as we're going through Sahih and whatnot. The books that are compiled for authentic narrations, it's possible they're bringing narrators and they're relying on their narrations just because they know this narrator from Fulan is always authentic. Doesn't mean they're vouching for the narrator in general. But because this narrator from Fulan is usually authentic, they're willing to bring his narrations. نعم. طيب. That was الموصوف بما يقتضي تليين روايته. The second one is الموصوف بما يقتضي تضعيف روايته. Okay. He mentions in this 3 حالات. We'll go through this بإذن الله تعالى in the next lesson. والحمد لله ورب العالمين.